The sound of a wrench clattering against concrete echoed through the garage as Mike Sullivan's world collapsed around him. "You're fired," the words hung in the air like exhaust fumes, suffocating and toxic. If you've ever wondered whether karma is real, stay with me until the end of this story, because what happened just 10 minutes after this moment changed not just Mike's life, but everyone who witnessed it. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more real-life stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Mike stood frozen, still gripping the oil-stained termination notice in his trembling hands. At 42, with thinning hair and permanent grease under his fingernails, he wasn't just losing a job, he was losing his lifeline. The only thought hammering through his mind was how he would tell his 10-year-old daughter Emma that they might not make rent this month. "I need someone reliable," said Richard Harmon, the newly appointed CEO of Precision Auto Group, a chain of high-end repair shops that had recently acquired the family-owned garage where Mike had worked for 15 years. "3 absences in 2 months is unacceptable in my business model." Mike wanted to explain again about Emma's asthma attacks, about being both mother and father since his wife's death 3 years ago, about the impossible choices a single parent faces when their child can't breathe. But Richard had already turned away, his Italian leather shoes clicking purposefully across the concrete floor, his attention already on his smartphone. The other mechanics kept their heads down, the silence broken only by the muted sounds of tools against metal and the soft hiss of the air compressor. Nobody wanted to be next. Mike's hands shook as he began clearing out his toolbox. Each wrench and socket represented years of accumulated knowledge, each tool a story of problems solved and vehicles restored. This garage had been his sanctuary after losing Sarah to cancer. The familiar smells of motor oil and rubber had been his constant while everything else in his life crumbled. In the small employee break room, Mike sat heavily on a metal folding chair, staring at the photo of Emma he kept in his wallet. Her gap-toothed smile and bright eyes looked back at him, unaware that her world was about to change again. He had promised her they would be okay after her mother died. How could he keep that promise now? Outside in the parking lot, Richard Harmon was walking toward his Tesla Model S when his phone rang. He answered it while unlocking his car, his voice shifting from stern businessman to something softer. "Yes, I'll be there for the board meeting." "No, I just had to handle a personnel issue at the new acquisition." "Just maintaining standards, Dad. You taught me that." As Richard ended the call, he noticed his tire was flat. With an irritated sigh, he realized he'd have to go back into the garage he'd just left, the garage where he'd just fired a man for putting his sick child first. Inside, the mechanics glanced up as Richard returned, his confident stride slightly diminished by the inconvenience. "I need someone to change my tire," he announced, dangling his key fob. "I have a meeting in 30 minutes. The garage manager, Pete, a man with 30 years of experience and a perpetual coffee stain on his uniform, looked around at his team. His eyes landed on Mike, still sitting in the break room, visible through the glass partition. "Mike," Pete called out. "Customer needs help." Mike looked up, his red-rimmed eyes meeting Pete's steady gaze. A silent communication passed between them, the kind that only exists between people who have worked side by side for years. With a slight nod, Mike stood up, tucked Emma's photo back into his wallet, and walked out to the main floor. Richard's expression tightened when he saw who was approaching. "I don't think Mike's our best with German and electric vehicles," Pete interrupted. "And he's still on the clock for another 10 minutes. The tension in the garage was palpable as Mike silently took the keys from Richard's hand. The other mechanics watched from the corners of their eyes as Mike walked out to the parking lot, followed by an uncomfortable-looking Richard. The Tesla sat gleaming in the afternoon sun, its sleek lines a stark contrast to the beat-up Honda Civic parked a few spaces away, Mike's car, with a child's booster seat visible in the back and a faded honor student bumper sticker. Mike knelt beside the flat tire, his experienced hands already assessing the damage. A nail had punctured the expensive performance tire, a simple fix for someone with his skills, but a significant expense for the owner. "How long will this take?" Richard asked, checking his watch. "I have a board meeting." "About 10 minutes, Mike replied, his voice professional despite the circumstances. He began gathering the tools he needed from the nearby service cart. Richard stood awkwardly to the side, scrolling through emails on his phone, occasionally glancing at Mike working efficiently on his hands and knees. "Your daughter," Richard said suddenly, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "How old is she?" Mike looked up, surprised by the personal question. "Emma's 10. Richard nodded, then fell silent again. Mike continued working, removing the nail and preparing to patch the tire. "My father built this company from nothing," Richard said after another moment, his voice different now, less clipped, more conversational. "He started with one garage, not much different from this one." Mike said nothing, focusing on his work. "He was always at the shop. I barely saw him growing up," Richard continued, almost to himself. "When he finally handed me the reins last year, he told me the secret to his success was never compromising on excellence." Mike's hands stilled for just a moment before he resumed working. "The thing is," Richard said, watching Mike's methodical movements, "I'm not sure he was right about what excellence really means." As Mike finished the repair and began lowering the car from the jack, his phone rang. He glanced at it, then back at the nearly completed job, conflict evident on his face. "Go ahead," Richard said, gesturing to the phone. Mike wiped his hands on a rag and answered. "Hey, Emma Bean," he said, his voice instantly gentler. "Everything okay at Grandma's?" Richard watched as Mike's face transformed during the brief conversation, the worry lines easing, a genuine smile appearing as he listened to his daughter describe something about her day. It was the face of a man who had found his purpose in life, and it had nothing to do with cars or careers. "I'll pick you up soon, sweetheart. Love you too." Mike ended the call and turned back to the tire, tightening the last lug nut with practiced efficiency. "All set," he said, standing up and handing the keys back to Richard. "The patch will hold, but you should consider replacing that tire soon. The tread is getting low." Richard took the keys, looking at them in his hand for a long moment before meeting Mike's eyes. "My father missed my high school graduation because a VIP client needed their car that day," he said quietly. "I swore I'd never be that kind of father, but here I am, becoming that kind of boss instead." Mike shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond to the sudden vulnerability from the man who had just fired him. "I made a mistake," Richard said, the words seeming to surprise even himself. "Not about the tire. About you." Inside the garage, the mechanics had gradually migrated toward the large bay doors, pretending to be busy while watching the interaction in the parking lot. Pete stood with arms crossed, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I've been running this company by spreadsheets and efficiency metrics," Richard continued. "My father would be disappointed. He knew every employee's name, their kids' names. He built loyalty, not just profit margins." Mike stood silently, the afternoon sun highlighting the gray at his temples and the lines of worry that had become permanent features on his face. "I'd like to offer you your job back," Richard said. "With some changes." By now, several of the mechanics had abandoned any pretense of working and were openly watching. Pete's smile had grown wider. "What kind of changes?" Mike asked cautiously. "For starters, flexible hours for parents with sick kids," Richard said. "And maybe an emergency childcare program for all our locations. It seems like good business to keep our best mechanics, even if they have responsibilities outside these walls." The transformation that came over Mike's face in that moment was something everyone present would remember for years to come. It wasn't just relief, it was the restoration of dignity. "I can't promise I won't need to be there for Emma sometimes," Mike said, his voice steady. "I wouldn't respect you if you promised that," Richard replied. "Excellence isn't just about never missing a day of work. It's about the quality of character we bring to everything we do." What happened next stunned everyone watching. Richard extended his hand, not in the perfunctory way of business transactions, but with genuine respect. When Mike took it, something shifted in the atmosphere of the entire garage, a collective exhalation, a rebalancing of something fundamental. Pete was the first to break the silence, slow clapping from the doorway. The other mechanics joined in, their applause echoing off the metal walls and concrete floor of the garage. Richard looked around, seemingly noticing their audience for the first time. His face flushed slightly, but he didn't withdraw his hand from Mike's. "I think we all have work to do," he said, raising his voice to address the gathered mechanics. "Starting with reviewing our personnel policies. Pete, can you gather everyone for a meeting tomorrow morning?" I want to hear from all of you about how we can do better. The story of what happened that day spread quickly through all 12 locations of Precision Auto Group. Within a month, Richard had implemented a company-wide policy supporting employees with family emergencies. Within 6 months, employee retention had improved by 40%, and customer satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. But the real story wasn't about business metrics. It was about what happened to Mike and Emma Sullivan. With his job secure and the new flexible scheduling, Mike was able to be there for Emma's doctor appointments without fear of losing his livelihood. Her asthma improved with consistent care, and for the first time since losing her mother, she began to thrive rather than just survive. As for Richard Harmon, the lesson he learned in those 10 minutes in the parking lot transformed not just his management style but his understanding of his father's legacy. Excellence wasn't about ruthless efficiency, it was about creating a community where people could bring their whole selves to work and be valued for more than just their productivity. 1 year later, at the company's annual picnic, Richard watched as Mike coached the employee softball team, Emma cheering from the sidelines. He thought about how close he had come to losing this man's expertise, loyalty, and the example he set for everyone around him. "Your dad would be proud," Pete said, appearing beside Richard with 2 paper cups of lemonade. He handed one to Richard. "Not of the profit margins, though they're better than ever. But of the kind of leader you're becoming." Richard took the lemonade, his eyes still on Mike and Emma. "I almost missed it," he said quietly. "If I hadn't gotten that flat tire." Pete chuckled. "Funny thing about that tire," he said, taking a sip of his lemonade. "Never did figure out how that nail got in there, right in the parking spot where you always leave your car." Richard turned to look at Pete, who was now watching the softball game with an innocent expression that didn't quite mask the twinkle in his eye. "You didn't," Richard said, realization dawning. Pete shrugged. "Sometimes people need 10 minutes to remember who they really are," he said. "Even CEOs." Richard laughed, a genuine laugh that started deep in his chest. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't thank me," Pete replied. "Just keep remembering what matters. The cars will always need fixing. It's the people we can't replace." As the sun began to set over the company picnic, casting long shadows across the grass, Richard Harmon understood that the true measure of success wasn't found in spreadsheets or profit margins. It was found in the strength of the connections between people, connections that could be broken in an instant or, with a little courage and humility, repaired and made stronger than before. And that, dear viewers, is the power of second chances and the reminder that sometimes, the most important business decision is remembering our shared humanity. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories that remind us of what truly matters in life. Because in a world that often values productivity over people, we need these reminders that the most valuable asset in any organization isn't machinery or money, it's the human spirit that no balance sheet can measure.